Hi, it's Nicole at House of Akong, and today I'm going to be guiding you through step by step how to construct a pair of my skinny joggers. I have made these joggers in so many different fabrics. It is my go-to garment whether I'm lounging around the house or going out for the day or the evening. I love the fact that they're so comfortable and they can be dressed up or down depending on the occasion. I've designed these joggers to have a high-rise fit with a wide elasticated waistband, a slightly dropped crotch, which is for comfort, and a skinny fit through the lower thigh and the lower leg. It's finished at the bottom with a ribbed ankle cuff. It has 2 front pockets and 2 welt pockets at the back to carry all your essentials. I have rated this pattern as ready for a challenge, simply because of the construction of the pockets, particularly the back pockets. This is something that is probably the trickiest part of the pattern if you are not used to working with stretch or knit fabrics and or you are not used to putting welt pockets in. You may find that a bit of a challenge. But apart from that, the rest of it should be pretty straightforward, but I'm going to guide you through and show you how to construct the entire garment from start to finish. If you're not super confident working with knit fabrics or stretch fabrics, and or you're not very confident putting pockets in, particularly welt pockets, it is perfectly fine to not put any pockets in the back. I do have customers who have done that and they love the shape of the joggers as they are. If you would like to have a go at the pockets but you're a little bit nervous about it, what I suggest is practicing on a scrap piece of fabric first until you feel confident enough to do it on your actual garment. Apart from working with knits and putting in the welt pockets, the other techniques that will be involved here are top stitching and attaching waistband and ankle cuffs using knitted rib fabric. So, are you ready? Let's get started. First up, let's talk about your fabric choice. For this particular pattern, you will have the most success if you choose a medium weight knit with about 25% stretch. I'm going to be using this navy blue ribbed knit. This particular fabric actually has 2-way stretch, but if you were using a fabric with 1-way stretch, just make sure that the direction of the stretch goes perpendicular to the grain. In other words, that the direction of stretch goes across your body and not up and down. If your fabric, like mine, has 2-way stretch, then you want to make sure that the direction of maximum stretch happens across the body and not up and down. In order to test how much stretch your fabric has, what you can do is just take a piece of the fabric. You can either cut a section, a scrap piece, or I just usually do it from the bolt, and hold one end at the end of your ruler. And you can either measure 10 centimeters or around 4 inches and just gently stretch the fabric, not overstretching, but just gently stretch. You want to make sure that if you're going on 10 centimeters, that the fabric stretches to at least 12.5 centimeters quite comfortably. Or if you're going in inches, if you put your fabric on the 4-inch mark, you want to make sure that it stretches comfortably to the 5-inch mark. In addition to your main fabric, you are going to want some knitted rib for the waistband and for the ankle cuffs. For this project, I am going to be using this rainbow rib, and it comes in a already folded strip of just over 1 meter. You will see that knitted rib sometimes often also comes in a tubular form, like this one, in which case you would just go ahead and cut to your desired length. All the fabric layout and cutting guides are provided within the sewing instructions with the pattern. Now let's talk about all the tools and notions that you're going to need in order to complete your skinny joggers. In addition to a standard sewing machine and or an overlocker and your main fabric and your rib, you are also going to need some thread, which is for your sewing machine and also your overlocker. And generally you would choose a color that is complementary to your main fabric. You are also going to need a ballpoint needle if you're working with a knit fabric. And this is the best needle to be using so that you don't end up with skip stitches and issues with your sewing. For cutting out the fabric, you are going to need your rotary cutter and pattern weights. Or if you prefer, you can use your fabric scissors and some pins. In order to accurately stitch the back welt pockets, you are going to need to make some markings on the back of your fabric and also on the pocket bag. For that, I would recommend either using erasable pens, or I tend to prefer using tracing paper and a wheel. You're also going to need some interfacing, which is going to help to stabilize the stretchy fabric around the pocket areas. I would suggest choosing an interfacing that complements both the color of your fabric. Interfacing generally comes in light and dark colors, so choose a color that will complement your fabric. I'm using a dark gray because my fabric is quite dark, and also choose a weight that is suitable for the weight of fabric that you have chosen. You want to make sure that the interfacing is fusible so that when you apply heat using an iron, it's going to fuse to the fabric itself. For the waistband, you're also going to need some wide elastic, and this elastic is 5 centimeters wide or roughly about 2 inches. You're going to need enough of a length to go around your middle, just where it feels comfortable. In order to thread the elastic through the casing, you're also going to need a big safety pin, and obviously you're going to need some thread scissors near your sewing machine so you can cut those pesky threads away. Now let's talk a little bit about choosing the right size. The sewing instructions come with very detailed tables showing you the measurements for both your body and for the finished garment. Go ahead and use that table to determine the best size to use for this project. Bear in mind that if your fabric does have a minimum of 25% stretch, that the finished garment measurements will not include that stretch. There will still be quite a bit of give in the pattern, so if you're a little bit nervous, you can still go with your usual size. The feedback I've had from pattern testing is that many of the testers who were a bit nervous and went up a size then decided that the next time they would actually make it in the lower size, which was their normal size. So that stretch does account for quite a lot. Once you've determined the right size for you, the other adjustment you may want to think about making is to the length of the leg. You will notice on the pattern that there's a lengthening and shortening line. My legs are quite short, so in order to shorten the pattern, what I do is just fold the pattern like this and then just smooth out the line as you go down. If you need to extend the length of the pattern, you would just simply cut along the lengthening shortening line, separate the two pieces, and again join them together with another piece of paper, smoothing out the lines. Remember that the pattern is designed to have a slightly dropped crotch, so you may find that the rise looks quite big compared to other trouser patterns that you may have seen. It's just a feature of the pattern. If it's something that you don't like about it, then you can decrease the rise by, again, folding and smoothing out the line. If you're not that comfortable with hacking and grading patterns, I would suggest you just make the pattern as it is, just making the adjustment to the leg. Now we're going to lay our pattern pieces out onto our fabric and start cutting out. One thing to note when you are arranging your pieces onto the fabric to cut out is to take note of the grain lines. On each of the pattern pieces, you will see a long line with an arrow that dictates the grain line. The grain line is the direction of the fabric that will have the least stretch. So on my fabric, because my rib is running up and down, and this is the direction of the greatest stretch, I'm going to make sure that I align my grain line so that it is perpendicular to the direction of the greatest stretch. You're going to do that for all of your pattern pieces. Just bearing that in mind, you can now refer to the cutting layouts that are included within the sewing instructions and go ahead and cut your pieces out. Remember, while you're cutting out the pieces, to transfer the pattern markings onto your fabric. On the back piece, you will need to transfer the position of the welt pocket onto the wrong side of both the back pieces. Here I'm just using my tracing wheel and carbon paper. At the end of the cutting out process, you should have the following pieces. 2 back pieces cut, mirror images with the welt pocket position marked on the wrong side of the fabric. You're going to have 2 front pieces, 2 front pocket bags, and 2 back pocket bags, and these will all be in your main fabric. In the rib, you're going to have your waistband piece cut out and 2 ankle cuff pieces. You're also going to have the following pieces of interfacing cut out. 2 pieces which are 5 centimeters by 15 to 17 centimeters depending on the size you are making, and this is going to go onto the top flap of the welt pocket bag. You're also going to have 2 3.5 by either 15, 16 or 17 centimeter pieces which are going to be fused onto the wrong side of your back pieces over the welt pocket opening. You're going to have 2 pieces which are going to go onto your front pocket bag on the slanted edge, and 2 corresponding pieces which are going to go onto your front pieces, and that is to stabilize the seam where the pocket bag and the front piece are going to meet. You'll find that if you don't use interfacing and you've got a pretty stretchy fabric, that the tendency is going to be for the fabric to stretch out and the front pocket not to sit nice and flat. So I highly recommend that you interface where the seams are going to meet on the front pockets. Just before we start hitting the sewing machine, let's go ahead and fuse all our bits of interfacing to the relevant pattern pieces. Let's start with the back, and we're going to fuse the interfacing to the wrong side of the fabric, and we're going to be using the pocket opening mark as our guide. So I'm going to take the smaller rectangular piece of interfacing, and what you'll notice is that the piece of interfacing should be actually 1 centimeter all the way around the opening. So here I'm just going to place it just over the marking for my opening. Making sure the glue side is down on the interfacing. Hold it down for a few seconds. And now let's do the other side. Next, let's take the back pocket bags, and we are going to put the bigger rectangular piece of interfacing and align it to the top of the pocket bag. We're going to repeat this for the other pocket bag. If your fabric has a pattern or a certain direction, you want to make sure that you are making the pocket bags are facing the same way before you interface. Now we're going to do the front pocket bags, and we are going to interface along the seam allowance here on the slanted edge. Let's repeat for the other side. And finally, let's interface the slanted edge of the front pieces along the seam allowance where the front pocket bag is going to be attached. Now that all the relevant pieces are interfaced, we can now get to the sewing machine. The first step in our construction process is to attach the front pockets. So here I've got my front piece, and I'm going to put my front pocket bag on top of it with right sides together. You can see that both the slanted edges here have been interfaced, and that is to stabilize and make sure that we do not stretch the fabric as we sew. So with right sides together, I'm going to align these up and just pin them in place. Let's do the same for the other front piece. Now we're going to take it to the machine using a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and we are going to stitch down these edges here. So I'm here at my machine. I have my stitch length set to 2.5. I have it on a straight stitch, and I'm loosening the pressure on my presser foot. That is because I'm working with quite a stretchy fabric, and I don't want the foot of the sewing machine to pull on the fabric too much. So if you have that option in your sewing machine, I highly recommend that you go ahead and reduce the pressure on your presser foot as much as you can. As an alternative, you can use what's called a walking foot, which will hop along as you sew, but for me, I think this will be enough. So let's go ahead and stitch those seam allowances of the front pocket pieces. With the front pocket bags now attached, what we're going to do is press the seam open, but we're going to press it towards the pocket bag. So first going to press the seam open, and then I'm going to press it towards the pocket bag. With the pressing done, what we want to do now is just stitch a straight line about 2 millimeters away from the seam on the pocket bag, and therefore catching the raw edges underneath. That's called understitching. With the pocket bag now understitched and pressed, what we are going to do is fold it along the fold line indicated on the pattern. You should have two notches here, one at the top, one at the bottom, to indicate where the fold line is. So if you just fold the pocket bag along that fold line, and we are now going to take it to the machine and stitch across the entire bottom of the pocket bag. You can also pin it into place, which really helps keeping the layers in place, especially when working with tricky stretch fabric. Okay, let's take it to the machine. If you're already very confident working with an overlocker, you can actually skip the stages where you do the machine stitching in some areas and just go straight to overlocking. Here I've set up my overlocker and I have got the tension set at 4. I've got my stitch length between 2 and 3, and I have my differential feed just above 2. This fabric actually has a lot of stretch, and I have just done a few little test runs, and I think in order to avoid that wavy seam, I've taken the differential feed almost up to 2. Now I'm going to overlock the bottom of my front pocket bags. Now that the front pocket bags have been closed at the bottom and overlocked or zigzagged, the last thing left for us to do on the front before we move on to the back pockets is to use a long basting stitch on our sewing machine and to just stitch the top of the pocket bag and the sides of the pocket bags in place. Now that our front pieces are inserted and basted in place, let's move on to those back pockets. I'm going to show you the easiest way that I have found to actually insert these pockets. It will take a bit of practice if you're not used to it, but let's just have a go. Okay, so if you remember, we had interfaced the back of our back piece here. And even though we had drawn our pattern marking onto the wrong side before, it is obviously not now visible. Let's park this for now. What we're going to do first is take the pocket bag on the wrong side, which has the interfacing on it. What we're going to do is redraw the opening of the welt pocket where it would be on the actual back piece. So the easiest way to do that is to take a ruler, and ideally one that gives you in centimeter increments, on half centimeter increments. What we're going to do is redraw our rectangle, bearing in mind that we've got a 1 centimeter seam allowance from the top, 1 centimeter seam allowance from the sides, and the pocket opening itself is 1.5 centimeters, meaning once we've drawn this centimeter seam allowance here, we want to go 1.5 centimeters in order to redraw the entire rectangle. So let's start here. I'm going to go on this side and I'm going to draw a line which is 1 centimeter away from this edge here, and that will be the seam allowance on this side. I am going to do the same over here. So go 1 centimeter seam allowance, draw that in. Along the top, I am going to go 1 centimeter. Now my interfacing didn't actually go all the way to the top, so I'm going to make sure that my centimeter is being measured from the actual fabric and not just the interfacing. And now from here, I'm going to measure 1.5 centimeters, which is this line here. And I'm going to draw that in like so. So this would be the original welt pocket opening that was drawn on the back piece pattern. Now the next bit is a little bit tricky. We want the back piece to face right side up. And we want to align the pocket bag so that it's facing right sides together with the back piece. But we want to make sure that this opening that we've just drawn onto the back piece matches up with the pattern marking that we made on the actual back piece. Now, I understand, I appreciate that that's now mostly disappeared. I mean, I can just about see mine, but another way that I sometimes do this is if you feel, you can feel where the interfacing starts here. Effectively, if I show you this way, what we really want to do is line up the top and sides of the interfacing with the top and sides of the pocket bag. So what I tend to do is just sort of hold the piece up and just feel for where the interfacing starts on this side and where it starts at the top. Sometimes you can even fold the fabric back if it's not too thick. And so I can see that there is where it lines up. So I'm now going to pin that. And I'm going to find the same on the other side. Another thing you could do is actually use a pin. Use a pin to mark where the top of the interfacing is. Use another pin to mark where the side of the interfacing is. And that junction there is where you would align this part of the pocket bag. So here, I'm going to pin that in place. Now I can see that there's a bit of excess here on my pocket bag, meaning that it's just ever so slightly not aligned. I'm just going to smooth that out. Now with these pinned in place, what we're going to do is take it to the machine and we are going to start our stitching exactly at this point where these two lines meet, exactly at this point, and finishing exactly at this point. That's going to be our first line of stitching. Our second line of stitching is going to be parallel to that, and it's going to start exactly at this point and finish exactly at this point along this line. It's super, super important that you keep the lines absolutely parallel and that you end them on these points. If you don't, what will happen is that your pocket will end up being a little bit skew-off, a little bit wonky, and it will not result in a lovely clean look. This process does take a bit of practice, I am not going to lie. And so I would suggest, if you've not done this before, to do it on a practice piece before you do it on your actual garment. It may take a few goes before you feel confident enough to tackle it on your garment. One good tip I'm going to give you about stitching these lines to make sure that we hit exactly at these points is instead of starting there and back stitching, because sometimes with back stitching it's very hard to get consistency in hitting exactly the right point. So what we're going to do is actually we're going to start here. We're going to stitch forward to the point and then we're going to pivot and then start stitching all the way back down. So if I should show you here, I'm just about 1.5 centimeters away from the end point here. So I'm going to take my stitch length down to just over 2. Okay, so I've now got my needle exactly at that crossroad. What I want to do now is swivel, turn the piece around. So it's like back stitching, but we are going to do it just going forward, and that will give us the precision that we need for this particular job. So now I'm going to go all the way back down this line. When I get to this point, I'm going to do the same thing, stop, swivel, and effectively go back down like a back stitch. So make sure to take care that you are keeping exactly to the straight line that you've drawn. The accuracy of these two lines of stitching will really do a lot to create the nice finish on your pocket that you're looking for. Now I'm going to do exactly the same thing along the parallel line of stitching, which is 1.5 centimeters away from the first one. Now what we should have is our back pocket with our 2 parallel rows of stitching, and we want to make sure that they look nice and evenly distanced from each other. The next stage is to cut the opening for the pocket. This bit is a little bit nerve-wracking. You want to obviously make sure that your right sides are facing together before you make any cuts. Once you cut this pocket open, if you discovered you made a mistake, it is extremely hard to correct it. It's not impossible, it's just extremely hard. Okay, so what we're going to do is just to guide us with our cutting, we want to draw a straight line, so 1 centimeter in from this edge here, just along the middle. So it doesn't have to be completely exact, but obviously the more precise we can be, the better. So I'm just going to draw that like so. And then we want to make a little triangle. So from this corner here where we just ended our stitching, we want to meet that middle line. I'm going to do the same on the other side. Like so. Okay, now with that drawn in, what we're now going to do is actually cut along these lines here. So I've got my fabric scissors, and what I'm going to do is just pinch this in the middle, just so I can make the first cut along the line. And what we are doing is we're cutting through both layers. We're cutting through both the pocket bag and the back piece. So now with that little cut made, let's just go along. Now we're just going to go right into the corner, just where we ended that row of stitching at the top. And now we're going to do the same to where we ended that row of stitching at the bottom. Now let's turn it around and do exactly the same towards the other side. Now we've made the cut, what we are going to do is turn the pocket bag over to the wrong side of the back piece. What we need to do is feed all of these pieces in through the opening that we just made. Now bearing in mind, because we've interfaced all around the opening, it will feel a little bit stiff. So just use your fingers and gently poke all the edges through. What you should end up with is a perfectly rectangular opening that is nice and even. Like so. Obviously we need to press this so it's not so bouncy, but this is what we're going for. If I flip it around to show you the other side, what we have on the wrong side is the right side of the pocket bag facing up, and again with our opening like this. So what we're going to do before we press this in place is we're just going to take the bottom here and we're just going to pinch it up so that it covers the entire opening. If I show you from the right side, it'll probably be easier so you can see what's going on. From the right side, this flap here becomes the little opening or the pocket, top of the pocket for the welt pocket. Okay, so we want to make sure that that is folding back at exactly the right point, 1.5 centimeters. And just the way my interfacing is here, it kind of wants to bend there at the top of the interfacing, but it kind of needs to be a little bit smaller. So I'm just going to fold it with my fingers where it needs to go, just to finger press it in place for now. But in a sec, what we're going to do is take it to the iron and actually press it all in place. Okay, so let's just give our pocket a press. Okay, now I just want to make sure that I'm pressing the pocket bone, it's called, this little bit of the welt pocket that's showing. I just want to make sure that that is exactly the right height before I press it into place. With the back pocket now pressed in place, you can either top stitch all the way around the rectangle, making sure obviously not to catch the top of the pocket opening as you go along the top. Personally, I prefer quite a clean look on my welt pockets, so I tend not to do the top stitching, but it will give an extra security to the pocket. What I do instead is I just sort of do a bit of a stitch in the ditch. So along this bottom line here, I'll just do a little stitch in the ditch, and that is just to hold the position of the flap in place. When we come to actually close the pocket, that is when we can secure these ends here. It's totally up to you what method you prefer. The final stage of this back welt pocket is to now close the pocket bag. So if we turn the piece over to the wrong side, what we're going to do is fold the pocket bag up so that the bottom edge now lines up with the top raw edge here of the pocket opening. So it's going to close like that. The way we're going to sew this will require a little bit of maneuvering. Okay, so what I'm going to do just for now is to pin this in place, just so that we don't lose the position. Okay, now what we're going to do is turn the piece back over to the right side and where it's upside down. So we're going to have the back piece facing us upside down with the right side up. We are going to peel back the right side. What you'll see when you peel back the right side is the edge of the pocket bag, and you're also going to see the little triangle that we made when we opened the flap. Okay, when we cut open the pocket opening. So what we're going to do is actually run a straight line of stitching down here, and we're going to be catching this triangle just here. We are then going to turn the piece this way. And now we're going to move this part of the back pocket out of the way. Then we're going to stitch all the way down here along the same line that we'd stitched when we had first run the parallel stitches for the pocket opening. We're going to stop 1 centimeter from the end. We are going to pivot again on the sewing machine. And now we're going to peel the right side of the back piece away. You can see again here, well, that's come apart a little bit. You can see our triangles here. We're then going to go all the way down, catching the triangular flap and closing the pocket bag on this side. If it is too tricky to do that all in one maneuver, feel free to do them one at a time, each side at a time. But I'm going to now go and do all of them together in one go. With the pocket bag now sealed, I'm going to overlock the edges where I just stitched. And the back pockets are done. You'll probably be very pleased to know that from here on out, the construction is actually very, very straightforward. This was actually the trickiest bit. Now you're over it. Let's move on. For the next stage of the process, we're going to start joining the front and back pieces together. First, we're going to get one of the back pieces and lay it right side up. And then we're going to get the corresponding front piece and lay it so that they are right sides together. So the front piece will be wrong side up. We are going to align and match the notches on the inside leg seam, which runs from the crotch down to the hem. So I'm just going to lay that down. Go ahead and pin in place. And then we're going to take this to the machine or overlocker, and we're going to just run a seam all the way down following the seam allowance. We're going to do that on both sides. Next, we are going to open up the front and back so they are facing like this. And we are going to put right sides together on both sets. So the front should be right sides together with the front, and the back should be right sides together with the other back. Let's go ahead and pin. We're going to match up the crotch seam here. Now that we have the front pieces pinned together and the back pieces pinned together, we're going to just machine stitch along this seam allowance, either on our sewing machine or on the overlocker. Now we are going to join the side seams. So let's open everything up. All right, so I've got my front here, right side up. and I've got my back wrong side up so that the both right sides are facing. What we're going to do now is join the side seams on the left and the right. So go ahead and pin and then machine stitch all the way down each side seam or on the overlocker. So there, the main body of the garment is now completed. I told you that'd be easy, didn't I? Okay, now let's work on the waistband. Because I'm using a striped rib for my waistband, I am going to need to pin this so that when it is joined together, all the stripes will line up and be pattern matched. If you're just using a plain rib, you may be able to just skip this step. You probably don't have to do such laborious pinning. You can just go ahead and close this seam just along here. I've cut my waistband as one piece, but if you had cut it on the fold as two separate pieces, then you will need to join also on this side. And just while I'm doing this laborious pinning, I might as well do my leg cuffs. So I'm now going to join also the leg cuffs along the raw edges here. When I am pinning striped rib, I will usually pin it at every change of color. In this case, it's actually a lot of colors, and so this pinning is taking a while, but it really is worth it because this is the best way to get an accurate pattern match when you open the seam. Okay, with the three pieces pinned together, I'm now going to take it to the sewing machine. And now for the moment of truth. We see how our pattern matching went. Not bad. With the waistband and leg cuffs joined, let's just do a bit of pressing. So now I'm going to press open the seam on the waistband. You'll either have one seam or two, depending on if you've cut the waistband as one piece or two pieces. So if we press that seam open, and then we are going to fold the waistband in half. The rib I'm using already has a sort of pre-fold, but if yours doesn't, you want to just fold it in half and press along that fold line. Okay, and then let's repeat that on both the leg cuffs. Now we are going to attach the waistband to the top of the joggers. And the way we're going to do that is by turning the waistband so that the right side, or the side that you want to face out, is actually on the inside. What I like to do is match up the seam. If there's a single seam, I like to match that up with the left side of my joggers. If you have two seams, obviously you match up with the left and the right. Because I want the waistband to be at the top of the presser foot, what I'm going to do is actually turn the garment inside out, which will make it a lot easier to sew as I go around. So I'm just turning the joggers inside out, which means I will now turn my waistband so that the right side is facing out, and I'm going to pin waistband seam to left side of joggers. So this is the left side here, I believe, yes. Now the pattern includes notches for the waistband. I did not cut them out, so I'm just going to do the quartering method, which is finding the halfway point first, and then putting those together to find the quarter points. And now I have some points that I can match. I'm going to match one of the quarter points to the back seam. Okay, so for the next quarter, I am matching that with the right side seam of the joggers. And then the last one, I'm going to match with the front seam. Okay, Now we need to leave a gap of about a couple of inches or so, and I usually do this at the back. So what I'm going to do is actually pin where I'm going to start and stop my stitching. So from there to there. So what I'm going to do now is take it to the machine. I'm going to stitch it with the waistband facing up and stretching gently as I go. What you want to do is make sure that the waistband is stretching evenly and it's feeding through with the joggers in a nice even manner. Okay, so I'm at my starting point, and what I'm going to do is just gently stretch the waistband. I'm going to put my fingers on where the next pin is or where the next notch is, and I'm going to gently stretch both the layers together so that I can make sure that they are feeding evenly through. Now I have attached the waistband apart from a 2.5 inch gap at the back. This is where we're going to be threading through our elastic. To gauge how much elastic you need, the best thing to do is just measure it around yourself. So if you just put it around your middle where you want your joggers to sit, and bear in mind they are designed to be high rise, so I usually have mine sitting just under my navel, and just stretch it, not too much, not too little, with an overlap of say about an inch, inch and a half. Once I know how long I want it to be, I'm simply gonna cut it to the right size. Then we want to take a large safety pin. So we're just gonna use the safety pin to guide the elastic through, pulling as we go. Okay, when I get to the end, I'm just gonna bring the safety pin back through the same gap that we started feeding the elastic in at the start. Now, with these two loose ends, what we want to do is sew them together. So here I've joined both the ends of elastic with a rectangular set of stitches with an X in the middle. Now I'm just going to feed that back through the waistband. And what we're going to do now is just close that seam. So I'm just going to now machine stitch to close the gap in the waistband. With that gap now successfully closed, the last thing that we need to do is attach the leg cuffs. So in the same manner that we did the waistband, I'm going to take my leg cuffs and I'm going to have it with the stripy side, or the side that I want facing out, on the outside. I've got the garment inside out, and what I'm going to do is line up the seam of the leg cuff with the inside seam of the leg. So I'm going to place the leg cuff inside. And I am going to pin it in place. So again, just stretch it so that it's evenly placed within the trouser leg, the jogger's leg. And then what we're going to do is take it to the machine as we did with the waistband, and with the cuff facing up on the machine, we're going to machine stitch all the way around to attach the two together. Now that I have both leg cuffs attached and the waistband attached, all that's left for me to do is to overlock or zigzag stitch all of these raw edges on the waistband and on the leg cuffs. And goodness me, I do believe we are done. All that's left is for us to turn our garment right side out, give it a final press, and there we go. One pair of skinny House of Akong joggers. Well, that's it for now. I hope you found that useful. Please feel free to share your makes with us on Instagram with the hashtag HOA skinny joggers or HOA anywhere jogger. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you again next time. Bye.